Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Spinal Hygiene podcast. I'm Dr. Tabor Smith. Today's episode is titled, What Causes Spinal Degeneration? So we've been talking about this in the last two episodes, that if we can figure out what causes spinal degeneration, then through deductive reasoning, we can actually create a plan that would help us lower our risk factors, help us in trying to prevent this decay of our spine. And so it brings up the question, do we know what causes spinal degeneration? And maybe if you asked this question 100 years ago, the answer would be no. But today, the answer is yes. We do absolutely know at least some of the causes of spinal degeneration. That there may be some that we can't prevent, but there are some that we know, and that it looks like there may be some prevention or at least lowering of risk factors that we could begin to implement into our life. So let's look at this. There's two things that are major risk factors for spinal degeneration. Number one is this concept of imbibition of the disc in your spine. So in your spine, you have 24 vertebrae. Between each vertebrae, you have what we call a disc. This disc is full of fluid. It actually allows your spine to move. And so the disc, just a quick fact, when you go through puberty, you lose a lot of the blood flow to the disc. The blood flow to the disc is important because it carries nutrients in, waste materials out. But after we go through that, a lot of changes in the body happen hormonally, and we end up losing a lot of the blood flow to our disc. What becomes very, very important after puberty to keep your discs healthy is a process called imbibition. This imbibition is movement or pumping of the fluids in and out of the disc. And when that disc begins to move, imbibition begins to happen. Now waste materials are pumped out of the disc, nutrients are pumped into the disc, but this process of imbibition has to happen on a regular basis, or this moving of your spine. Now look in today's society and tell me, what's the one thing that we're not doing? We're not moving. So we're not getting this imbibition of all the discs in our spine, this movement, this pumping. And it just so happens that's absolutely necessary to keep our disc healthy. So without it, it begins to dehydrate. And you've heard of disc degeneration or disc disease, right? Degenerative disc disease. And that's what this is. It's the loss of disc height. It's this joint beginning to dissipate, and it can eventually even get bone on bone, and they can grow together. This is arthritis. This is spinal degeneration. So if we know that lack of imbibition causes the disc to degenerate, then through deductive reasoning, we know that if we improve imbibition and we keep imbibition at high levels, then potentially we could actually prevent the degeneration of that disc. And that's one of the things that we implement in our daily home spinal care exercises. If you go to homespinalcare.com, we talk about these. You can download my book for free, and then you can opt in and subscribe to our updates at homespinalcare.com. But imbibition is huge. It's such an important factor. This motion, this movement of the spine, making sure we do specific daily exercises that we'll talk about when we get into those later in these podcast episodes. Or again, you can go to homespinalcare.com and download the book and read it, and you'll find out if you don't want to wait, go do that. But that's one thing that we know causes degeneration of the disc, lack of imbibition. The second thing we're going to talk about today is called Wolff's Law. Now, Wolff was a scientist. He actually discovered the fact that bone lays down or remodels in an area of pressure. So what does that mean? Well, basically, he discovered the cause of bone spurs. Bone spurs, like we know that specifically is arthritis. You've heard of arthritis or spinal degeneration, and you've seen maybe pictures or x-rays where there are pointy bone spurs on the edge of those. That's because of Wolff's Law, that in areas of wear and tear, area of increased pressure, then calcium deposits build up, and that turns into what we call now, the lay term is bone spurs. Now, if we know what causes bone spurs, stress, wear and tear, abnormal motions like we call biomechanics, then if we can restore proper biomechanics, proper spinal alignment, and if we can decrease the wear and tear, or at least address the wear and tear, and we've been doing that for years in physical therapy and certain aspects of care of the spine, then through deductive reasoning, again, if we know that Wolff's Law causes bone spurs, and there are some things, some exercises, there are some visits to our chiropractor, that we can do to actually keep our biomechanics of our spine improved, keep our spinal alignment improved, and therefore potentially, through deductive reasoning, we see we could prevent or lower our risk factors for spinal degeneration. So those two things, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget, because as we go, we're going to get into the specifics of each exercise and how you can implement these exercises to prevent. You know, I use the word prevent where a lot of times the big CDC, FDA, all those things, they don't want us to use the word prevent. So let's say lower your risk factors of spinal degeneration. And trust me, that's what you want to do for yourself and for your family. So we want it to be able to lower our risk factors by improving imbibition and by eliminating Wolff's Law, or wear and tear along the spine, abnormal pressures. And we want to improve biomechanics of the spine. Stay tuned. I'm going to show you exactly how to do that in an episode very soon. We'll start talking about the specific exercises, and we'll get into that in a later episode. Thanks, guys.